Welcome to Talk About Tulsa. Our goal is to try and answer the questions: why is Tulsa and the surrounding areas growing? What is the appeal for people to relocate here, and why should businesses consider investing in this area? Consider this like a drawn-out investigative report, but a bit more fun. So, let's talk about Tulsa. Welcome to another episode of Talk About Tulsa. I'm your show host, Patrick Thompson. And of course, on this show, I like to talk about Tulsa because I'm trying to figure out what is the intrigue in Tulsa. So I'm researching where I can in the internet and even people to figure out why has Tulsa been growing over the last, for me, 17, 18 years. And one of the things is I have gone through my journeys that I've seen is that there's a lot of small businesses in Tulsa that become big. And as I stated in an earlier episode, one of the biggest commerce, I guess you could say, is energy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, along with land, but energy is a big deal. So with me today, I have a good friend of mine, Old Jocks Rule, Jim Buddy, that's right. We've been working out now for quite some time through the birth of two kids. One of them is now 6, which is insane.
Yep.
6? That's
yep.
Yeah, that's crazy. Mr. Chris Cox. Chris Cox is the CEO of Flashpoint Energy. He has been in Tulsa for how long?
Since 2015.
Since 2015. He also sits on the board of LPG
Ventures, LPG Ventures.
LPG Ventures. And weren't you nominated one of the youngest something or other?
Not that I know of.
Okay, not that he knows of. Nevertheless, I wanted to talk to Chris today because, as I said, I'm trying to figure out what is the draw on Tulsa. And I know a little bit of history about Chris and where he comes from and got here and all that other stuff. So I'm just going to ask him a couple of questions. So, Chris.
Yes,
thank you for joining me today.
Of course. Glad to help you out.
Yeah, hopefully the kids won't.
They will.
They will.
That's all right.
So, Chris, tell me, first of all, what do you do?
So I am the CEO of an energy company that primarily sells and distributes in the midstream space, the distribution of propane, butane, and natural gasoline, primarily propane for the majority of folks that would probably do business with us. There's more customers, let's say, of propane than there would be of butane or natural gasoline. So we distribute, and that group of products is called natural gas liquids. And we distribute natural gas liquids across North America. So we have a subsidiary in Canada. We move product, I believe last count was in 41 states, 4 provinces in Canada. And we buy, sell, trade, distribute. We have 5 proprietary terminals where we have exclusive throughput and own assets on the ground to distribute propane and butane on a local level. So most of that's done with rail cars. So we don't own pipelines. Big companies in town like Williams and One Oak, we will work with them and utilize their pipelines and gas processing and buy from them. And then distribute out via rail cars or via their pipelines or other pipelines, and then sell those to end users who will then distribute it to their marketers accordingly.
So basically, you know nothing about propane.
Nothing. Yes.
Nothing.
I started in the retail propane space, so I was a retail manager coming out of college for a company called Ferrogas. They're out of Kansas City. Did that for a couple of years. And then after that, I left Ferrell and I went to a company called Hicks Gas, and they were out of Central Illinois. And we worked with them for, my wife and I worked there, but we lived out in Central Illinois for 5 years. And working for Hicks Gas, I left Ferrell and I said, I don't want to work for a publicly traded company ever again. I want to work for a smaller regional independent propane company within a year, they went public with a company here in Tulsa, not to my knowledge, called NGL Energy Partners, and they were the retail group to the energy company that went public in 2011. I want to say 2011. Could have been 2010, but and they formed NGL Energy Partners and they went public. And NGL Energy Partners is still here in town.
So when did you and your family move to Tulsa?
So then I went to Hicks in 2010. We moved to Tulsa in 2015.
Now, why? Is it because of the transition of the company?
Yes, company and promotions, and I wanted to get out of the retail and go more into what kind of I do today, which is wholesale distribution of propane.
Now, was it you've got to move, Chris, if you want to work for us, or?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Especially for the job and the role that I was looking for.
Now, when you got here, tell me, what was your perception of Tulsa?
If it makes you feel any better, if anybody here in town ever watches this, they will be glad to know that my boss at the time didn't want to hire me because I was a little bit of a free spirit, if you will, on opinions. And their exact line was, there's not enough managers to manage Chris. So he wasn't exactly thrilled to bring me here to Tulsa. But they did, and I actually ended up becoming pretty good friends with those guys, and I think they ended up working with me pretty well.
Yeah, they did. So, but what about the city of Tulsa?
So we were living in a podunk town in central Illinois called Rantoul, Illinois. And if anybody here knows Rantoul, I apologize if I offend you, but it is not the nicest neighborhood. It is the home of an abandoned Air Force base north of Champaign, Illinois, and it took a big economic hit after the military base shut down. And Rantoul, great people there. I still do a lot of business in Illinois. I love a lot of the people of Illinois, but I had to get out of there. It did not sit well with me. And so, if you've ever been, it'd be like, for the best example, if you were living in the Sahara Desert and then you came to anywhere that had water. That's kind of what it was probably like, to be most accurate. So Tulsa was like manna from heaven. And so we loved everything about Tulsa right out of the gate. It was just so much better.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, just being honest.
So there was everything. Okay.
There was everything.
So I
like to say Tulsa has one of everything, at least. One good of everything. That's about right.
So that is hilarious. You come from the desert and then come to anywhere that's water.
That was it, to be honest.
Okay.
Now, I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. I grew up in Los Angeles, California. My dad was an entrepreneur. I grew up in the Southwest. And so I spent a good portion of my childhood kind of between those two areas. And I mean, we lived in some pretty nice areas. And so I knew what nice was. It's not like I don't know what nice is or something like that. But I was just some redneck, country bumpkin or something. No, that's just not true. I just have really thoroughly enjoyed Tulsa for all of it's a big, small town.
I love that. Yeah.
So
did you and your wife, Catherine, by the way,
Catherine
do research on Tulsa before you moved here?
No.
Just
visited one time, maybe twice.
There it is. Just moved in.
We moved as a lot of people do for their job. I mean, at the end of the day, that was the primary thing.
Yep.
Tulsa had a lot of the amenities we were looking for. And it just really checked a lot of boxes.
I mean, same thing. I moved here for a job. And
yeah, I think a lot of people that come to Tulsa end up really liking it. And it's not like at first Tulsa's flashy. There's nothing that you sit at first. You drive through Midtown and you're like, oh, wow.
Right.
We actually have like nice things, because the TV makes it think like you're driving, like Oklahoma's nothing but the panhandle.
And tornadoes.
And tornadoes. And that everyone believes that a tornado has destroyed Tulsa every year. But thank God for Travis Meyer saving us all. But that's not the case. Right. And so, yes, we saw that. We knew it had a good energy, background too. That meant a lot to me. There's a lot of other companies in town that are adjacent or do what I'm a part of. So that's always great.
So when again, I know a little bit of his backstory. So you left NGL
Yeah,
to start Flashpoint,
correct.
and you, basically it was three guys.
Three guys.
Three
yes.
guys. We're gonna have
We
executive
put
leadership.
everything in.
Now, at some point, you moved out of Tulsa.
So, yes, the two partners, myself and John, we were here in Tulsa. John was from the Kansas City area, and another partner, Darius, was already living in the Kansas City area. So Darius was already there. John decided to move back to Kansas City for family reasons. And then we decided to bring in another partner, a guy who wanted to be. And so it was like they were all in Kansas City. And I said, you know what, if there was a time for me to move, we did that. So we did that. We ran into the worst arachnophobia. It was straight out of a movie, disaster of a house. And I kid you not, we were there for 5 weeks, turned around, drove home. We had our house remodeled a little bit in that time. Took the yards for sale sign literally out of my yard, threw it into my garage, moved back in. They still had the staging furniture there. And the staging people are like trying to rush to get their furniture back so we don't break it or something. And they showed up, and then I just offloaded the U-Haul, and I was like,
That's it.
And that was it. And, I think, I'm a big fan. There's a guy online I recommend to everybody who likes motivational stuff. A guy online, his name is Ed Milet, and he says something that I thoroughly love. Things happen for you, not to you. And I firmly believe that getting that out of our system and really just going to Kansas City, which I like Kansas City. Kansas City's a great town. I got nothing against Kansas City. But getting that out of our system allowed us to never have that girl who got away type feeling.
Very interesting perception. I like that. Yeah.
Oh man, maybe we should. And when I didn't want to personally leave, Catherine wanted to, and if wifey wants to go, then we go.
Yeah.
And I got nothing against Kansas City. It was just she wanted to be closer to her family too, which is further north in the Iowa area. So we decided at that point, we're coming back. And we moved back after Arachnophobia Part 2, and we've never looked back, man. I think Tulsa's a gem, man.
And I think that she, if I'm not mistaken, she was the one that's like, this house is no, the spider.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try to make it work.
But
I'm
the
not.
spiders were just.
When you catch spiders underneath your baby's bed that are like a bunch of them, not like, oh, I caught one spider in her bedroom, but like a dozen or something, you're just like, let's light a match.
Yeah, we're out of
Chris, you're in propane. You know how to do this.
So when you moved back, it was a while before you were actually nominated as a CEO of Flashpoint.
Yeah, because in the beginning, you got to think of it in the way a business cycle works. We didn't buy a business. We had to grow the business. Nobody believed in us. We had to put all of our own money in. We were told the market doesn't need another wholesale firm.
Right.
There was a lot of things. But luckily, we had a lot of relationships on people who would actually do business with us. But when you just start out, man, and you start out with just a small book of business, you got to keep your expenses as low as you can. So we're just partners in the beginning. Us three, John, Darius, and I, we're just deciding to go for it, and then we hire one employee, then you hire another. And today we're up to the 17, employees or contractors that we work with there at Flashpoint and growing. And so, we'll probably be within the next couple of years, I don't know, well over 20, 30, 40 employees, we might guess.
So was it unanimous to say, you're going to be the CEO?
Yeah. Yeah, because we all have our different roles and strategy. And we do this thing called EOS, which is an entrepreneurial operating system. I highly recommend it for any small business owner that's out there. You got to get past a certain point where it's not just you. But once you start scaling your business and you've got a good vision, you need to have a visionary and integrator, and you need to get the right people in the right seat. And John and Darius are just awesome at being great partners. So, you got to know when to wear your ownership hat. And as an owner in the business who works in the business, you have to know when to wear the ownership hat and then when to wear your role hat. And they're really good at that. I mean, They're great guys. They're butt kickers. They're constantly working. But, let's say John, he's a great salesman. He doesn't want to deal with the management of stuff. John doesn't. He wants to sell. He wants to work with maybe the other salesmen. But John doesn't want to sit around worried about vision, execution, terminal designs, all the rest of that operational stuff. That's just not him.
Yeah. And you actually had some further or post undergrad training to expand your knowledge of how to do all this.
So when I was I decided to do a master's degree in predictive analytics online through Northwestern's online continuous education programs, I guess is what it would be. Professional, it's called an MSPS, and it was kind of, a decade ago, but it really was kind of cutting edge at the time. How do you put predictive models out there? And a lot of that stuff is really how AI and how optimization and all those things are predicated, is all just predictive modeling. And so I just knew at the time that I needed to get really good at that and utilize those types of things. Today, as a CEO, I don't get to use a lot of it, but it really helped establish my bedrock and knowledge, and then research a lot of things that I wouldn't have spent a lot of time researching to have a better understanding of the market.
I think that I tend to disagree because, first of all, gambling on Tulsa, I mean, it's an energy place, but you didn't know if it was going to work. You didn't know if this Flashpoint was going to work.
Sure.
But I think that the wisdom and the knowledge that you gained from your education helped you say, okay, if looking forward, I can probably do this, that, and the other. And it's working out quite well.
I do think education plays a role, don't get me wrong. And I do think that you need to have the knowledge skill set to be successful at what you're going to do. But I would never have been able to start the business without the support of my wife. I mean, that at the end of the day is the reality of it. Because if you don't have your wife on board when you're trying to start a business, you're setting yourself up for a disaster of a home life.
Yeah.
And so, I always wanted to start a business. I always wanted to get something going on my own. But it wasn't really until my wife was like, you really should consider it, where I was like, it's go time. You know what I mean?
About when was this?
Well, shoot, it would have been in 2018.
Okay.
Because we started in January of 2019.
Wow.
So, this is year 6. Yeah.
Wow. With Catherine kind of encouraging you, this brings me to my next question, if you will. When it comes to Tulsa and what you have learned about just Tulsa in general and now family, when it comes to raising a family, you came here with, let me do the math here, 2 kids, right? Ed was still in diapers.
Now I've had 2 kids here in Tulsa.
Yeah. So with that aspect of you putting roots down here and you've got a growing family, tell me how do you feel about the resources and the support that you have in Tulsa when it comes to your family?
I think that the number one thing that Tulsa always has going for it is its faith community. I think Tulsa has a very strong faith community, from the Catholic community to the evangelical communities to the Baptist communities to all the non-denominationals. Tulsa has a faith-driven community, and I like to say that Tulsa has faith, family, and financial reasons why you'd want to move here. And so faith being that, if you are a person of conservative faith beliefs, Tulsa is your home. I mean, it just is. And I am. I am a Catholic. We've got a great Catholic community here. We have integrated ourselves into that community, and they have done an exceptional job. Here in town, the Catholic community, my dad was recently in the hospital. They run St. Francis, and I know the priests pretty well. And so I was able to talk to them when my dad was there. To my children going to school, you've got so many great Catholic institutions here in town, and then great high schools as well, with my daughter going into high school. I mean, just a great education background and a great support background that's just there.
Would you say, being a transplant, because heck, I haven't met not too many people that aren't, this faith community has been your family because you're here now? Family started to move.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the beginning, my dad moved here, and my aunts moved here, my grandmothers moved here. But in the beginning, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they're going through it just like you're going through it. They share your beliefs, they share your convictions, and you just go live your life and you share it with the people that you're friends with.
That's fantastic. Now, when it comes to your kids in school, because I know Mr. Chris Cox has a very staunch opinion of the education. Unfortunately, and I will be the first to tell anybody, because one of the people that listening to watch my show was talking about education. Hey, we're not that high in Oklahoma. It's the truth.
I actually would just disagree. I mean, I would think that there is a number of public schools in town that are failures. That's true. I mean, the numbers are what the numbers are. My kids do not go to public school. I'm a big believer in the parochial education. I'm a big believer in the Catholic education. I'm a big believer in faith and reason. Tulsa has fantastic Catholic education at the end of the day, and a great Christian education. I mean, we have Metro, we have Victory, we have Regent. The list goes on. And if you were to make a case like I'm living in Colorado today, and my house expenses are through the roof, and I could move to Tulsa, save myself hundreds of thousands of dollars, what type of quality education could I receive here for my children?
Very good.
That would be the equivalent of what I'm paying on housing. I'm investing in my family in that particular case.
That's good. That's good perspective. My kids go to public school, and that, quite frankly, a lot of people will say that, Oklahoma's so low in the education. Well, like you said, not all public schools are created equal.
Actually, if you were to take out the two major metros of Tulsa, and I bet you if you were to select a handful of those, from what I have read, the rural community public schools actually test closer to just normal, whereas you have the city
That's true.
schools.
So like I said,
and I would also add that so many people choose private schools, that's going to also make it difficult for the public schools to have the same scores.
But we have gigantic public schools here. So
yes,
and like he said, you make a good point. It's not just so I'm talking more specifically of Tulsa Central, but they're the surrounding areas, and those schools are great. And you got your Owasso, Jinx, Union.
Yes,
they're great schools. They're really good schools. Now, you said something else about.
I mean, they're no Bishop Kelly.
They're not.
I mean,
they're
clearly.
not. But they do okay.
They're pretty good.
They're pretty good. I mean, if
you ain't gonna beat them in football, let's put it that way either.
Now, you mentioned about. So you talked about schools and housing. You made a great point. You moving from outside of Tulsa and Oklahoma. I say this. I've stolen 3 houses here. I've stolen 3 houses. I used to live in Texas. Taxes, houses, the amount of houses we can get here in Tulsa is ridiculous. What is your opinion of the economy and just living here?
I think it's good living on the cheap. That's what I tell everybody. That's my favorite line. It's good living on the cheap.
Living on the cheap.
Yeah, I mean, we have a hot summer sometimes. We have a little bit of snow sometimes. But overall, we got a pretty good little weather. We get some tornadoes. Well, other people get hurricanes. Other people get earthquakes. Other people get fires and snowstorms. There's a risk to living on planet Earth. And fact of the matter is that I think it's good living. Yeah. I really do. I think that there's a lot of reasonable policies, too. I think that you get a reasonable time to get a permit. If you need something, they get it done. You don't run into a lot of regulatory bureaucracy. That's a bigger deal if you want to do business. If you want to build something here, they want you to build it. That's the name of the game.
Fantastic. That's good stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know because I got a job. So
yeah.
But this is good to hear this from you about, because I do know that there are tax benefits and to come and to build and to have a business here. So, but I don't see the behind the scenes as much as you do. So, which is great for you to say that, because I believe it.
Well, the biggest thing that people are talking about, and I'm not trying to say anything, contentious, but if you think about what's the biggest part of the fires after the fires have happened in California, is it's going to be how do you how do you get through the bureaucracy to rebuild? That's a big concern for a lot of people here. And I think in Oklahoma, probably because of tornadoes and just the way that we are. I mean, I think that there's just a big support group of people trying to green light things and to get it going and to help you get it done. I think we got a big get it done type of attitude.
I agree. So would you say that you're a native Tulsan now?
Well, you live here long enough, you got to start saying it. I'm not a native Tulsan, but if people ask where I'm from, I always tell them I'm from Tulsa.
Yeah, I'm not native, but I've been here now. I'm knocking on 20 years, so.
I'll tell you what, my dad is not in good health, and I'm looking at buying funeral plots, and my dad's looking to be buried here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'll tell you what, if he's buried here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I'll probably be buried here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So say what you want, but if you're planning on burying yourself and you've lived there long enough, you look like a pig, you walk like a pig.
You might be a pig.
You might be a pig. All right? You may be from Tulsa.
Yeah. And so this is, I'm glad that you said these things because Chris is from California.
Yeah.
And lived in several different places. So it's not like he's just blowing smoke.
Yeah, I mean, I was literally born in Cedar-Sinai Hospital in, I believe that's in Beverly Hills, California. Yeah. I wasn't, my parents weren't, big, wealthy Beverly Hills at the time, but, and then they moved to a different part of Los Angeles. But I believe I'm a 4th or 5th generation Californian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you say that about little old Tulsa.
Yeah, it would be my great or something like that rode out there and helped settle Los Angeles. And, I think turn of the century. And then my grandmother was there also right after World War II. And, they all saw it change. They just saw it kind of turn into something that it wasn't, they're just, and then they eventually kind of moved back to Missouri. They moved around too. So
that's all good information. I'm glad you shared that. And most people, okay, maybe I'm kind of a nerd, but occasionally I will check out the Propane
Buzz.
Buzz.
The Buzzcast.
Buzzcast. Now, because it's not just propane, it's the chemistry between him and John.
Yeah.
Tell the audience about.
So I like to think of it as we provide a very niche product to a handful of, and in this particular case, since it's for propane, it's for propane retailers, a curated 20-minute podcast that John and I do. Now, John is a former professional broadcaster. John had a podcast for years on the Iowa Hawkeyes, and then he was a part of Hawkeye Nation. He was Hawkeye Nation for all intents and purposes. And so John is a very polished broadcaster. He knows how to play the straight man. He knows how, and I provide the color commentary. And so, I mean, I can talk clearly at length at any given time with just hit play and I go. But John does such an exceptional job at really bringing across that professionalism, that sense of the play-by-play, talking about what's going on, and then I lay into it, and then we have a nice give and go.
Yeah.
And that allows us to have a very specialized podcast. The reason we do that is we don't make any money off the podcast. What we do is we say, how do we turn cold calls into warm calls? I need an opportunity I don't need to sell to 1 million people my new Hershey's bar, okay? I need to sell to a few hundred people a specific product, propane, and I need to make it to where they can have a connection with me without really seeing me on a regular basis. So then that way they can have that relationship with us. And so we are very specific. We don't just broadcast it to the world.
So very specific niche market, which is great, man. But the podcast is actually fairly interesting. If you listen to, like I said, John, the way he plays it, you could tell he's professional in podcast or in broadcasting. He does a great job. So, Chris,
but I bring that up because too many people think that I need to start a podcast so that I can talk about whatever. I'm going to talk about whatever. It doesn't matter. And then they try to make it like I'm going to be Joe Rogan. I don't need to be Joe Rogan.
Right.
we are a very successful company being very specific into what we do, and we apply our knowledge and skill set into the podcast to help drive a personality-driven marketing campaign. And I think that, Tulsa has really done a lot to bring more people who work online into Tulsa.
This is true.
And I think that we are a good example of what you could do. We've developed multiple internal apps. We have multiple apps we've developed. We've developed our own Buzzcast thing. We've developed a lot of the things that Tulsa would love to broadcast to the world, but we're like the niche thing that nobody cares about. So because of that, we won't ever get any real press. But the reality is that we do a lot of those things that can make a lot of businesses very successful in Tulsa that do business in 40-something states.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for your time today, man. There you have it, another Talk About Tulsa. Chris plugged it perfectly. I couldn't have done a better job. And I want to end with this, ladies and gentlemen, as I always say, stay curious.